Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Welcome to session 8 of the ASC 2020 Global Conversation Conference. My name is Paul Pangaro. I'm the moderator of the session. I want to begin by thanking the organizers of the conference, Jocelyn Chapman and Candy Hare, and all the supporting members of the ASC. It's a Herculean effort, and in particular for allowing me to have a variation of their format, which I will describe in a moment. The reason for the variation is to initiate an ambitious, perhaps audacious, but in my view, much needed set of conversations in the modern age. As you may have read in the session description, which I will also again put in the chat, the framing here is that we live in an unprecedented era of multiple global pandemics. While the COVID-19 pandemic of biology has forced an immediate response, other pandemics have existed for some time. We all have our own list here, I suspect. Rapacious technology, uncontrolled climate change, inequitable healthcare systems, racist socioeconomic structures, food and water insecurity. The list is very long. To stimulate the debate, the provocation of this session is, quote, why can't cybernetics tame the wicked pandemics of today? Now, when you hear wicked, please think explicitly of wicked challenges, sometimes phrased as wicked problems, in a very strict sense, from Horst Rittel, where, very complicated issue here that he articulates very well, but the uncertainties are many and deep, including the fundamental challenge of deciding on what the problem is, on problem finding, and therefore building a consensus on what the problem is, as well as what to do. Now, this places us, of course, right back in the realm of cybernetics and design and conversations for action. And again, I offer another link in the chat. So our purpose in a very limited time that we have today is not simply to identify what's outside of cybernetics.
You're sending your chats to the wrong place. You need to send it to everyone in the room, not everyone in the waiting room.
So someone spoke to me and that changed the thing. Thank you very much. Here we go. The first one come through. There we are. Yeah. It's a bug. Okay, so in the provocation of why can't cybernetics tame the wicked pandemics of today, we want to identify what's outside of cybernetics, if anything, but also to point out the limitations of cybernetics as a praxis against today's pandemics. But the purpose today goes beyond just this individual session and this individual provocation. This is only the first experiment in what I would like to be a revival of the storied Macy meetings in cybernetics that were the foundation of the cybernetic field. And again, here is a link. So those Macy meetings in cybernetics from the mid-40s and 1950s were conversations. They were transdisciplinary, as cybernetics has always been. But the purpose of these new Macy meetings is to host a cadence of such conversations focused on today's pandemics and taming of them, but not just transdisciplinary, conversations that are also transglobal, by which I mean diverse and inclusive, as well as transgenerational. This is most important to me, so that worldviews across age and generation and paradigms may be shared and new approaches seeded and grown and evolved for those who will both inherit and shape the world to come. So new Macy meetings, so that we may evolve our shared purpose. And I'm not the only one, and the first one by any means, not the first one, to have suggested such a revival. Andy Pickering very eloquently in 2014 did so, and others have before and since. So while I want to invoke these original Macy meetings in cybernetics, I need to be clear that these new conversations are not sponsored, as the original ones were, by the Josiah L. Macy Foundation in New York City. We have no formal affiliation with that organization at this point. We do have a strong spiritual connection to the original Macy conferences in cybernetics, and are grateful for the conversations that the Josiah Macy Foundation sponsored in the past. And those conferences, of course, remain a very vibrant and important aspect of our history, the history of cybernetics, as does the Josiah Macy Foundation in the world of foundations and supports. So we pay homage to that legacy, and we humbly stand on the shoulders of those giants, Warren McCullough, Margaret Mead, Heinz Forster, and so many others, who designed and participated in those original conferences. It was more than 70 years ago. Nowadays, I want to invoke the hashtag New Macy Meetings as an acknowledgement to that history, to these individuals, to the Macy Foundation, and to make a modern invocation and a statement of our ambition. And so now here is a bit more about the deeper intention, let me call it, of the New Macy Meetings. Now, to the format. Thank you for your patience in this intro. We have two main speakers, Larry Richards and Ben Sweeting, and they will address the question in about 5 minutes, why can't cybernetics tame the wicked pandemics of today? Then, each of two respondents, Delphina Fantini and Patricia Tichinetto-Clough, will answer these questions about the two speakers. Where did the speakers agree? And what did they miss? And my thanks to Michael Lissack for suggesting this format. We'll circle around a few times. We ask that you put questions in the chat. Also, after the next session, so this goes from 12 to 1 New York time, there's another session 1 to 2 New York time. From 3 p.m. on, there's a short closing by Jocelyn and Candy about closing the conference. And from there, we will have a continuation of an open conversation in this same room. So these are the intros. And now I will step out of the way. One actually brief change, Bernard Scott is not available today, and he will be substituted by Delphina Fantini, who kindly offered to come at the very last minute. So our first speaker is Larry. Larry, may I invite you to begin?
Thank you, Paul. Heinz von Forster famously said, A is better off when B is better off, where he intended that A and B be interchangeable. He offered this as a second order cybernetic principle or ethic, and it has haunted me since I first heard it, probably about 40 years ago. Haunted in a good way. It's continued to force me to think about certain things and to think about them in ways different than I had been at the time. I claim that this statement, A is better off when B is better off, is currently a false statement. It's a statement that, if true, would be desirable, but is currently false, and that A and B are not currently interchangeable. So, to complete the false statement, I really need to say A is better off when B is better off, and B is better off when A is better off. Now, the pandemic. I don't need cybernetics to solve the COVID-19 pandemic. We don't need that. There are solutions. We have currently best available knowledge about it. There have been numerous things that could have been done, maybe not to eradicate it immediately, but certainly to address it much better than it's been addressed. And I'm talking worldwide. Certainly there are places where it's been addressed much better than other places, but I don't need cybernetics to do that. What I need is the will to do it. And that's where the problem that I want to address arises. And that's where I think second order cybernetics has a key role. A is better off when B is better off, and B is better off when A is better off. Represents or points to a way of thinking that is not currently prevalent. The ways of thinking, or to use Peter Cariani's term, the mass psychology, is embedded in the languages that we use. Those languages support the systems that we have. The systems reinforce the language. We tweak the systems and we tweak the language, and we continue on with the same thing that we've always had, in a sense. Maybe a little bit better, sometimes not. I would propose that what cybernetics has to offer is a new way of thinking, a different way of thinking, and in particular, a way of thinking about ways of thinking, so that the way of thinking can be made a choice rather than just be the default that we end up with in our everyday lives without even thinking about the way that we're thinking. So I'm going to pass it on to Ben Sweeting.
Thanks, Larry. Paul asked us to consider the provocation, why can't cybernetics tame pandemics? And I think this is a prompt to talk about, find ways where cybernetics can be placed in an active way within the world. And in response, I want to offer a second provocation. Taming a pandemic sounds like a good idea, but is it? I think taming is just one attitude we might take, one serious attitude we might take to action. One of the things that I think cybernetics can contribute in practice is to action. Paul's use of tame invokes its partner wicked. The difference between tame and wicked is not, in my view, one of difficulty, but one of structure. Wicked situations are those that push back when we act on them. That's why they cannot be addressed through conventional methods that rely on analysis at the beginning, because the situation is always changing. And we can imagine simple versions of that structure, right? To tame a wicked situation is to move it in some way from the domain of the wicked to the domain of the tame, so that conventional methods can be applied. And that could be a substantial change to the situation or some kind of reframing. Taming, in that sense, makes things easier, but it does not necessarily make things better. So for me, the tame is not necessarily what we're trying to get to. Rittel didn't speak of taming, but of resolving, which we can understand as coming to an agreement for action within the situation. The situation in this case remains wicked, pushing back. Any resolution is therefore temporary, hence resolution. We need to resolve the situation again and again. What do we do when we tame a pandemic? For COVID, we could say that the pandemic would be tamed by the development of a vaccine, perhaps. But the development of a vaccine is actually a tame problem. It's to say, not to say that it's easy, and it's not even to say that it's possible, but the situation is not substantially changed by the attempt to do this. So conventional methods apply. While the wicked aspects of the pandemic could be alleviated by a vaccine, the underlying issues would still be present. So, for instance, the inequalities of public health are not addressed by a vaccine. To say that the vaccine tames the pandemic is actually a medicalization of public health. So the movement of public health to the domain of the tame, it's actually a reframing. Here, the problem is defined by the solution, as Rittel puts it. A vaccine makes the wicked aspects of the situation less pressing, maybe less damaging, but it does not mean they've been addressed. They still require resolution, agreement for action, rather than taming. For the pandemic of today's AI, I think something similar applies. We can, for instance, improve algorithms to be more meaningful in the way they're integrated with our tasks. We could reach some kind of consensus on which goals to optimize within a particular situation. We could undo prejudices that have been built into machine learning. But these are strategies of taming. We need to also ask, what tasks are we reinforcing by AI's assistance? Who is excluded within the consensus that we might come to on goals? Whose perspective is equality judged from? Rather than tame pandemics, my provocation is that we need to untame them. So we need to untame problems. It is only untamed situations that we can resolve. It is only the undecidable that we can decide. It is resolution, not taming, that is meaningful. The projects that attracted me to cybernetics originally were Gordon Plask's Musicolor project and an architectural project influenced by it called Generator. And these, I think, certainly within AI, are a model for a different way of doing AI. One that moves situations from the domain of the tame to that of the wicked. So back to Paul, thank you.
Thank you very much. Delphina, can we have you unmuted and ask for your response? There you are.
So there were two questions. The first one was, did they agree? And I believe they don't disagree, because I think Larry's analysis that the double arrow with A and B being better off actually has to do with the wickedness. I fully agree. I mean, I don't think they disagree. Each of them talk about slightly different issues, but I think the interdependency of A and B of Larry, together with Larry's idea that cybernetics offers a new way of thinking, it doesn't contradict with Ben's approach more towards wickedness, and that actually we should go for the untamed cybernetics approach, which grasps much more the complexity of the issue. As he said, it's easier, but not better. So I hope that replies the agreement question. And then the second question was, what did they leave out? I don't think they left out anything, because I think, specifically with Ben's analysis of the tame and wickedness, I think tame, which in a way brings back the problem of the domestication. I think that's one actually of the origins of the pandemic, which is we are getting too close to the complexity of nature. If we believe, and if we all agree, and if what we are seeing is true of where this virus came, is we've been destroying the ecosystem. We've been getting way too close to wild species that we shouldn't even be near. So I actually think this domestication and the tameness is one of the original issues of the pandemic. And I think Ben is very right when he says this is easier, but it's not better. And I think if we embrace this complexity and variety, taming is maybe not the best concept to address it. And in that way, going back to the, let's say, characters I've met in the cybernetic society, including Ranulph, I think they were all pretty untamable and unmanageable. And I think that should be kind of the core of these new forces to approach the issues.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Patricia, can we get you unmuted? Hold on one sec. Michael, are you there? Can you unmute Patricia?
I can do it, right?
There you are, even better. Please.
Yeah. Okay, yes, Delphina. They were untamed. I guess the first thought I had was that Larry's idea is an overall for then what Ben sort of became more specific about, because A is better off when B is better off when A is better off, seemed to leave out, although I think it was meant to capture that actually A is usually better off in the world we've lived in for a long time, because B is not better off. That the better off of A has often depended on B not being better off. We can think of racism right now, but class, capitalism has always been about that. Thinking about ways we think about is always great, and a great cybernetic principle and conversation principle. I liked very much, I don't know if I'm doing difference or not different. I like very much Ben's noting that taming is easy and is the easier one, and probably the more bureaucratic, technocratic, reproduction of inequalities and the other things I was pointing to. So yes, I think that we do better not to be taming, or not to just be thinking of taming, and to think outside of taming. And taming, as Delphina was suggesting, gives us a certain view of nature and the conquering of nature and the productivity, often connected in my mind with cybernetics and goal attainment. Very tricky. I'm not sure second order cybernetics really solve that, but I stand corrected, I'm sure. So for me, I was thinking that what's left out is the ethico-political. Actually, I don't think it's left out, but I wanted to be more specific. The ethico-political, when you cannot go back to an origin to solve the problem, as Ben said. You can't start at the beginning, and I think today of datafication and algorithms, where so much is going on, let's say in the middle, that no one is controlling, let us say, and except for the algorithms, and where Gordon Pass's notion of abduction comes to my mind, where you are constantly not solving problems at all, but shaping the good problem over and over again, and through speculation and experience, both of which are fully operative in the algorithm, so we had better catch up fast.
Thank you. We'll come back now to Ben and Larry, and then Patricia and Delphina again. I want to ask about the following of Ben, if you wouldn't mind. Is the problem that the word tame means something so different than resolve? And if we substituted resolve, is there an issue you have with that as well? Or I'm trying to separate the semantics of my use of the word tame with the original intention of resolve in your issue.
Yeah, I guess for me that's it's less about the words and what I hear by them when they're used, in the extent that I've heard them used. So taming isn't Rittle's word. I think it's first used in about 1980 by somebody who is essentially I think moving things, ways in which things can be moved back into tame ways of working, right? So that's my understanding of where that comes from, and I think for me it's kind of too near solve, but it might not be the word. I might be trying to distinguish between a certain practice, which is making a change in a situation that moves it into a space where it is now can be treated in this way, and resolve for me explicitly leaves open the future unpicking of the potential agreement. So I think this is important around maybe the difference between consensus and agreement, where A and B can reach a consensus on how things might be best for them, but what about C and D and E and 5 and 7, right? So there's certain things within the framing of the situation that I think we need to leave open the possibility of unpicking it all the time, and I think that has real value.
And that's in the word resolve. Resolve, great. Thank you for addressing that. I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to whatever others have said since you spoke, if anything.
Yeah, I'd maybe just like to pick up on a little bit more on that A and B point. So I think we could think of a situation where A and B are mutually supporting each other, right? So A is better off and B is better off, and that would be a world to kind of try to move to. But I think it always raises the question for me: what about C? What about 5? Right? What about what are we not looking at who's not involved in this thing we've made? And I think that For me, the inclusion of the observer is not just the, which we're interested in from a cybernetic point of view, is not just the inclusion of myself in a kind of epistemological way, but a critique of how a critique of inclusion and exclusion more generally, of who's included and how they're included and in what terms they're included. And I am following a little path about connecting Rittel to Paul Feyerabend. I believe they influence each other, although they don't reference each other. And Feyerabend's writing about, in the 70s, about objectivity seeming like it's neutral, but being a particular one inviting others to a dominant form of equity. I think there's some really noddy things in there that we have to get to.
Lovely, thank you. Larry?
Yeah, I'd like to ask people to think how we would have addressed this pandemic differently. We, not us individually, but the world, if this ethic, A is better off and B is better off, had been in place. Just to think about that. Imagine how it would have been different. I don't, when I say that we don't need cybernetics to solve the problem, we need cybernetics to create the will to solve the problem. I'm not suggesting that our desires necessarily in this situation are that much different. There are few people that would disagree, but in general, we want to minimize the deaths that occur from this disease and to try to distribute whatever serious illness there is in the medical care facilities that we have so that they don't get overwhelmed. There are some people that disagree with that, by the way. But I think overwhelmingly we don't. So it's not that we disagree on desires, that's the reason for the lack of will. The lack of will, I think, again, comes from a way of thinking that's embedded in our systems, in our economic systems, our political systems, our social systems, and that it interferes with our ability to address this problem in the ways that we know we could if we just had the will. Those systems are supported by the current way of thinking, by the language that we use, and until we address that big picture, we're going to be in the same situation, I think, that we currently are.
Mm-hmm.
Patricia, your thoughts?
I'm not sure. Maybe I'll just push a little on my own thought. I think resolve again and again is probably the same as problematize again and again, but I'm not sure. But Ben, you're shaking your head yes. So I like problematize better than resolve, although I make the distinction because I'm into algorithms right now because I really think that they are the infrastructure of everything we're doing. And so the way they resolve and reduce, even with the complexities that are involved in them, and they are quite complex and really interesting in that way, is something I would juxtapose against problematize again and again. How we would bring an ethic and politic to a process that's ongoing, an ongoing process where the rules change. So I guess one of the things that I think has been missing so far, and really, I'm loving the conversation, so if I say missing, it's not like a grade, is temporality or speed or slowness. How do we intervene in things that are going at speeds that are not the speed of our cognition or our embodiment, but are nonetheless attached to us totally?
Delphina, that's an interesting segue, I think, for what you might want to add here, whether Patricia's comments or others you've heard, please.
Yeah, I think all of their comments I am aligned with. I don't think they're contradictory at all. And yeah, I would again like maybe relate going back to Ben's analysis and authors that he's talking about. If we go to the wickedness, you never, in wicked problems, you never solve, you just make a good enough for the moment, for the context.
Yeah.
So in that way, I think, yeah, context and interdependencies are constantly changing. So you don't finalize the obra magna and solve it. And so maybe I'm not sure that solving and resolving is the best concept for something that is constantly changing, because you never really solve it in the first place. So that would be my addition.
Thank you. I skipped over any attempt to really define in detail Riddle's ideas and what the components of so-called wicked problems are. I try to avoid the word problems because already that invokes problem solving, which is wrong. In trying to reference problem finding and the rhetorical demand of the conversation amongst many to then say, what do we see? What are our values? What distinctions? What language do we bring to this? And then from there, what actions might we take toward a purpose that we sufficiently share to act in coordination? So another little mini comment about Riddle's intention. I don't hear any disagreement that we're talking about really wicked problems, really, I take that back, truly wicked problems in the Riddle sense and in the absolute sense. It's hard when we're playing with the language to go around it again. I would also claim that these are pandemics. A colleague of mine in AI said, what do you mean? AI is not a pandemic. And I said, well, it's all around the world. It's affecting our lives every day and it's determining the world we live in. That sounds like a pandemic to me. So I won that point for what it's worth to win a point. But can we move a little bit? And in a moment, I'd like to ask someone on the speakers group to maybe come in a little bit. How do we move from this sort of immersion in what we mean by the kind of problem we're talking about toward action? Can we say anything about that? Perhaps we can do an informal round on that. And then in the meantime, we'll look at some questions in the chat. What do we do? One comment in the chat actually was, is conversation theory already too much about atomized, individualized, decentralized conversations? And don't we need something new in 2020 for the situations of pandemics that we're talking about? Would anyone like to respond? Patricia, you're making noises. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was.
No, it was perfect. We could hear you thinking.
I'm sorry, I was thinking. Yeah, that's, those are, well, I was thinking of Feyerabend, who Heinz made us read, I remember. I just wanted to say that, Ben. It was great. But it's that long ago in a way. So I think one of the things we have to do is really I'll start there, with science and what you brought up about objectivity, what is a frame, what's abduction, what's learning from experience while you're still problematizing, or whatever word we use. Yeah, I think conversation, now here's my psychoanalysis coming in. I think conversation usually, I know you have a very complicated view of it, Paul, I know, but is too individually oriented. The individual needs to be complicated profoundly.
Sorry, the concept of the individual needs to be made complicated? I didn't follow the sentence.
I think the individual needs to be replaced by a notion, let us say, by individuation ongoing. And I think we need to do a lot of rethinking about the other thing that makes us think we're individuals, and that our bodies stop with the skin.
It sounds like a contradiction, of course. You want individuation, and yet we don't end here. Is it a different idea?
Yes, because we individuate in an environment that's individuating with us.
For both.
Levels of individuation.
Larry, was that you?
Yeah, we're both.
We're both, say the two?
We're both individuals and collectives.
Okay, good.
Paul, with respect to action, I think we, as a cybernetics community, need to identify ways that we can perform cybernetics. This was proposed actually by Pickering, who I wish were here.
He was invited, he was unavailable, yes.
Yeah, I wasn't able. And so as a start, I like your provocation, Paul, of a new Macy conference or new Macy meetings in which we take seriously the idea for proposals for performing cybernetics. I think the challenge for us is that these are such large endeavors in order to really, I mean, there are things we can do on a small scale, but there's, you know, the big deals, the big pandemics that you're talking about, Paul, require, you know, big efforts. I mean, just really huge projects, possibly. For example, I like to see a worldwide knowledge system available to all, available not only to acquire, you know, what's currently the best available knowledge, but, you know, to participate and change and contribute. And the technology, I think, is there. It has to be developed, but I think it's not impossible to do. But we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar project, and you know, how are we going to get something like that started? So yeah, let's start with the Macy meetings idea and see what kind of proposals we can come up with for performing our cybernetics.
I like that. The tangibility of that, I think it gets us a little further, and I appreciate this idea. We need a moonshot. You know, there's a Space Force, and then there's the idea of a moonshot. The question comes, and this is also reflected in the chat to some extent, who has agency, and at what scale is agency necessary in order to bring about any change? Another question back to you, Larry, might be, why should we perform cybernetics? I think you and I have an answer to that, but why cybernetics would be inside of that? Ben, did you want to say something in the meantime? I'm sorry, I will give Larry.
I guess my thought from your previous question is, I think one of the things that cybernetics could contribute, I don't know how far this gets any of us, but I think one of the things it maybe has a responsibility to do is to critique how we go about purposeful action. And I think our frameworks for doing this are maybe not quite up to the task right now. And I think that even, you know, sophisticated frameworks like Wicked Problems is also, you know, quite old now. And actually that kind of split, many of the situations don't split cleanly. So in COVID, I think the development of the vaccine, I think, is essentially a tame problem and is a no-brainer, right? However, the issues are not that there are other aspects of the pandemic that have to get dealt with in other ways, and the relation between the tame aspects and wicked aspects of a complex situation are not straightforward to deal with. You can't always just peel off the tame part to deal with it, because this has consequences for what you leave out.
Sure, per the chat and other comments, vaccine is necessary but not sufficient.
Yeah.
Right.
Paul, can you hear
some
me?
aspects. Yes, Penny.
I have been trying to contribute to the chat and it doesn't recognize me. I'm wondering if I'm not on the list or something.
Jay, can you look into that while we continue and let Penny know?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I would like to add something, and it's in relation to the vaccine. I think, yeah, the vaccine is the tame solution, but we're living outside really important issues that we need to discuss, and they're by no way minor, which is like the neoliberal system that we're living, globalization, and climate crisis, which are all elements that played a really important key role in the pandemic and in how we're going to get out. So, I mean, and these are quite complex. Also, going back to the interrelation of these three things. So I think focusing on the vaccine is extremely narrow-minded.
So
I think that if someone's speaking,
please, Patricia, go.
Just one sentence. I did want to add to Larry, I don't just mean individual and collective, but the sort of hybrid human environment technology that we've become. I say that after Delphina's remark about reconsidering what environment is and reconsidering the individual and the pre-individual aspects from which we individuate and keep on individuating in the environment as the environment. It's a bit more of an evolutionary sort of position than, let us say, autopoiesis was. So I think that's really important what Delphina said, that the pandemic is also a piece of what we're trying to deal with when we say climate change. So I'm sorry, whoever I interrupted.
Ben, did you want to go?
Yeah, starting from a slightly different place, I just wanted to maybe think about, continue the thread about maybe now versus the 70s, say. So in the 70s, you could draw a distinction, which was we can use Tame working here because it worked in the Second World War and it worked in the NASA moon landings. Right. And we need different kinds of ways of working with social challenges. I think some of the developments in technology move technology from the domain of the tame to the domain of the wicked, because the technology is changing as we use it. Van Furster has this great thought about when your car breaks down, you take it to a trivializator who turns it back into a trivial machine. Well, we have aeroplanes that are changing how they work while they're flying, right? Because they're learning about you as a pilot. So I think that, and maybe another issue around the interpenetration of social and technical systems. So I think there are not kind of clean lines to divide different kinds of problem approaches, and maybe that's something that could be clarified. Like what's the attitude we take, or how do we resolve how we treat the domains we work in?
The text chat is extraordinary and a bit overwhelming. Penny, I don't know if we solved your problem, but did you have a question you wanted to throw in as if you were typing in the chat? You're on mute. Penny, you're on mute.
Mute.
I wanted to ask Larry if the untaming of problems would stimulate the willpower he thinks is missing.
The language is a little difficult. I see when people talk about taming problems or even solving problems, they're talking about tweaking something within the current systems. Doing something that'll change it, it'll make it a little better than it was before.
Yeah.
I think we're at a point, or at least I am, we need to talk about entirely new systems. Now this presents the problem, if you will, the challenge at least of how do you go from here where we are to something entirely new without it being violent, without it being so disruptive that it destroys our lives in the meantime. This is where I think cybernetics has something to offer, because changing ways of thinking is not something that happens by violent revolution. It happens in the languages and in the conversations that we have and can generate. And what we need are ways to facilitate, I think, that kind of conversation, the Pascal version of conversation, so that we can get deep into these ways that we think about problems, and maybe imagine, just imagine, that's a starting point. Something new, something entirely different than what we have. Not that it'll be perfect, not it'll be better. It's not utopian, even though we may think in utopian ways, but it's something that's different than what we have now.
So if an entirely new system is needed,
Yeah.
your proposal is to imagine, which fits, of course, into the notion of speculative design or imagining a future. That is a way to begin.
Yeah.
Patricia, you're nodding. Is there a particular way you would assemble a group in a conversation to do that, or would you like to make another comment?
Yes, it's not a welcome one, even to myself, but I'm with you, Larry, but I think we do have to understand something about violence. And I'm thinking of the protests on the street and the fine line between who's protesting and who's violent. What is the nature of violence? I think we have to be very careful not to put that outside quite yet, and how to think it. I think we put a lot of people outside when we put that out. How would we put it together? I don't know. At the moment, psychoanalysts are going through a radical transformation, endless meetings, because, it's a completely, unfortunately, almost completely white institution. And people are trying to think that through, and questions like empathy and is there such a thing between people who have been excluded and those who have not, really hard things to think about. Can people be in a conversation? We have to hope for it, of course, and I am hoping for it, but I think there's some difficult steps in facing who's been excluded from conversation for a very long time.
Yeah, I like to make a distinction between sort of the violence that is an alternative. Violent alternatives are there as alternatives in the current system, and when they become the only alternative, that's what happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to distinguish that from how prevailing ways of thinking come about. And that's what I don't want to be violent. Not that there isn't violence along the way, because people have to do what you do, and you have to react to, to the situations you're in.
Yeah.
Some people have suggested that that we shouldn't try to, if you take my perspective, you shouldn't try to improve the current system. I don't take that perspective, because if I find something I don't like, I'm going to try to improve it. And if it stabilizes the systems we have still, then that's what happens. I'm not going to just ignore those things that I see that I want to happen. And the same thing applies to violence in the current system. So again, just the distinction between the violence in the current system and the process by which a new way of thinking can emerge.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate it.
Delphina, are you thinking anything? I can't see your face. I see only the cyborg representation, so I'm not sure.
I think I'm in the circle.
Say again?
I'm in the circle.
The circle.
Yes.
Who else would like to comment?
I can jump in next while
Please,
Delphine
Ben.
processing. Yeah. So I think one of the things that I would like to understand better is about consensus, because consensus seems, it's where I think Rittle's model kind of leads you. You have some stakeholders, you come to an agreement, it's political, you involve them, but kind of consensus is a kind of violence as well, because it's whose consensus is it, who's included in that, excluded, and because it creates then because it then sets the terms of what comes next, right? And then breaking a consensus is often also violent in different ways, maybe. So I'm interested in what are the kind of forms where we can unpick consensus in a way that's also gentle. So we stay within agreement without that agreement simply becoming something we're not maintaining. And yeah, and I think I can't think of governance, I'm just an architect, but I can think of that in interactive architecture with generator as an example, so it's an analogy, but it bypasses the problem of getting stuck in one mode by continually raising questions. So it suggests its own new formats, which are not supposed to be good. They're not improvements against the goal, which is conventional AI within architecture. They're just different, which then require a new consensus to be formed, or perhaps they require an agreement to go back to a previous. But you can't just stay in the same, you take out the inertia of, the inertia that tricks you into thinking something is the way things should be.
Yeah.
Ranulph was very interested in developing a system, especially in terms of articulating the definition of cybernetic terms, where people actually didn't form a consensus, where actually different people said what their understanding of that term was. And then you could sort of follow the people that, or interact with the people that you wanted to. So it was a very different kind of model than we often go by.
Mm-hmm.
There's a request in the chat to return to the pragmatics, my word, not the questioner's word. What do we do? What do we do about the current pandemic? We've had one offer from Larry in the general case of considering what futures we may want. Would that apply here? Is there something else that would be more effective and apply cybernetics to the current pandemic?
Just a clarification of language.
Please.
My interest is not on what futures we want. My interest is in what present we want.
Thank you. But by thinking of a future? I'm trying to connect to what you said before. Maybe I misheard you.
Yeah, I'm not. I'll leave it.
Fair enough. Good. So we want a better present. What do we do in the present for a better present?
I was thinking just one small thought, because I think this is a big question, that the Macy Foundations, the Macy meetings were incredibly interdisciplinary. Mm-hmm. And I think that we need to rethink what are the disciplines that we should be bringing together for the Macy's, for the new Macy's.
So consider the variety in the room, the variety and the interdisciplinary variety in the conversation in order to be effective.
Yeah, it's really important.
I would love to engage you and anyone in that very specific conversation mm-hmm. as we design mm-hmm. the next Macy meetings. Mm-hmm. I did put my email in the chat, by the way. If you're not already on a mailing list with me and you'd like to be included about New Macy, please let me know. It's emergent, it's experimental. We're still looking for how to do this. This was an experimental format. Again, my thanks to the ASC and the organizers for letting us break the normal pattern. Specifically, I'm thinking of doing a pandemic of today's AI before Thanksgiving. The reason for that topic is I'm at Carnegie Mellon, where I can find a lot of people with opinions about it, and also because it has a beautiful contrast to a biological pandemic, a technological pandemic, and so on. This is not to prefer one above another or to exclude others. There's a long list in some of the links I put in earlier, and maybe I would repeat those links now. Any final comments?
I'm working on a similar problem called the Insight Engine about also the AI pandemic, and really thinking about bringing together a transdisciplinary group. I've been working on a closed system that uses computational linguistics and lets people put different papers and gathers ideas across different disciplinary domains. Please be in touch with me if you're interested in learning more about the rollout of the Insight Engine 2.0.
Other comments from the panel before we close?
I mean,
I've just got one. Oh, sorry, Delphine, you go.
That, I mean, I couldn't agree more with, all what the panelists have saying about the relevance of a transdisciplinary conversation. However, in this pandemic, it's been extremely clear the importance of politics. We're not just dealing with a pandemic, and this is not like only like a medical or even like a OMS problem. So how would the Macy conference, a part of this multidisciplinary team, is dealing with the political power? Because I mean, at least, I don't know, I've been in these pandemics, I had to move for several reasons between countries, and every country has their own game, which is linked to like, the political approach to the pandemic. So perhaps anyone has something to say about that?
Well, governance, to use Ben's word that he doesn't want to use, governance has made sure up to now that certain populations really be affected by this pandemic, given, how where they live is determined, where they learn is determined. And this is a world phenomenon. And so you're right. I mean, the politics are very important. And, although the first Macy's went into my head really when I was too young to understand what was happening to me, and has never stopped developing in my work, sometimes to my surprise. But I've always been pretty attuned to the politics of it all because of Herbert Broom. We read Marx as much as anybody else we read in those days. My first reading of Marx with Herbert Broom. And so I think that's really important to think political and economic, global South, global North, really a lot of stuff. I think we can do it. Just need a lot of people to think a lot of things.
And the right variety in the room, right in the best sense, in an ongoing cadence of changing variety as the conversation evolves. Mm-hmm. Technically, we're coming up to the very end of the session. I'm so grateful to everyone for your contributions and for your attention. We look forward to continue in the new Macy meetings. And there is another session beginning now. So I need to give anyone permission to leave who wishes to. In the tradition of the conference, we'll stay open a little bit longer if people want to keep going a bit now. But those of you who want to move to the next session may do so. So my thanks to everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, Paul, I have a question for you. This is Fred Steyer.
Hey, Fred. Great.
It's more of a continuation. Well, first of all, thanks for setting this up. But I'm wondering if in the invitation to continue this as the new Macy meetings, we might even think about, because there weren't just the Macy meetings on cybernetics, but also the small group meetings on small group processes, and thinking about bringing in some of those other ideas, because some of the nicest ideas of cybernetics actually were in the Macy conferences that weren't called cybernetics. Mm. So I'm interested in your reflection, because this was, for me, this was a wonderful conversation, getting us, provoking us forward in a nice way.
The Macy meetings and the historical relationship here is very important to me. And I've been preparing a way of connecting to the Josiah L. Macy Foundation and saying, partly to see if there are aspects that are in the archives that we don't have access to now. We have the proceedings published by PS, and we have other things, et cetera. We have the original proceedings that Heinz, of course, edited famously. But I'm wondering if there are any other hints there. In addition, is there a way across foundations to find synergies and to actually raise money? Now, if you go to the Josiah Macy Foundation site, it's medical, 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 and educational. Fortunately, I have someone who knows the current president of the Josiah Macy Foundation, and after this meeting, I will prepare a note to her and see what kind of connection we can make. But this is a part for the whole. Again, it's back to Patricia's point, and one that's also much on my mind in general in thinking about designing for conversation. What is the variety in the room at any given point in this cadence, in this evolution from now, per Larry's point, asking the question, what is the present that we have, my paraphrase, and what present might we want? and then who is in that conversation. And again, the chat is extraordinary in the range of ideas and disciplines and almost discipline upon discipline. It's a matrix itself of ideas to bring forward and to mine, and we will save the chat, of course, and we will mine it to try to understand who we would have in the later conversations. I always come back to the conversations for action point, right? I don't just want to talk, I want to see where we go. So I don't really have a better answer than that for you, Fred, other than to suggest, actually I do have one more thing to say. Some of the documents I forwarded, which are also very much in formation, is I don't think we want a central nucleus of this new activity of New Macy. We might propose a pattern for the meetings that are held and a way of reporting back such that we build a body of experiences that can be shared with others. But if you wanted to hold one in a small group about your interests, please, and others as well, because of course anything centralized has all of those disadvantages. So spreading the opportunity to hold New Macy-like meetings is a kind of meta goal for me for the endeavor.
I just want to ask, are we coming back to a discussion a bit later on this evening? You can pick up on some of this.
There was the idea that after 3 p.m., after Jocelyn and Candy have their finish at 3 p.m. New York time, it's 1 o'clock New York time now, that we might continue, but that'll be a broad group, and we could continue that here in 2 hours. But the step after that, where the discussion might be, has not been formalized. Some people have proposed Slack channels. Someone has started a Macy 2 email list, but I find those problematic in some ways. And therefore I'm trying not to be one who tries to moderate or mediate for that. So it's a weak answer, Fabian. The plan is to hold more Macy meetings in future, but it is now not dated.
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved with the Cybernetics Society in the UK, and I think I'm certainly interested in what you're talking about. I'm also interested in setting up a technology special interest group, which some of you may be familiar with, Alexander Bogdanov, and the sort of crisis that technology evolved out of in Tsarist Russia and continuing on through the Russian Civil War, and the impact of technology at that time. And we just had a discussion with Rachel Dunscombe in the UK, who's involved with a technology health group in Australia, that if there is that health aspect of it, they might very well be interested in. So I think there's a lot of interesting things that.
Great, and there's also been a discussion of other organizations. So I'm in touch with Angus, who's now running the British Cyber Society, and other organizations.
We call it the United Kingdom because if you haven't noticed, we've actually got a systemic crisis about the situation in Northern Ireland. Just at this moment, Northern Ireland is not part of Britain.
I'm happy to be corrected with that.
So it's just a bit of a tension at the moment.
Understand.
I'm just wondering if I could, I would love to swing back because I feel like something needs to be left to this exact theme. Everything has been wonderful conversation. So I'd like to say something to the core epicenter of this discussion. I couldn't get the phrase out of my head. It's no longer about finding the answer. It's about facing the answer. And where that leads, which I do think is the answer to the problem, why isn't cybernetics capable of solving, or is cybernetics capable of solving the wicked problem? I would say, give just a provocative answer to it isn't, because it isn't really embodied. So the answer to, facing the answer, what that means is we know the answer. We simply, it's too painful, or the process of actually being in the body, which is defined as negative knowledge by Keats and by other people use that term, the ability to stay in trouble, to stay in painful situation, and then to act. And getting to action, there's this notion of the will. Well, at a certain point, if we are with ourselves and in pain, but we stay with it, eventually there's a kind of inner dynamic that develops. So this is a very abstract statement, but I actually come from dance and from the arts and from some very much sort of, you know, new thought thinking about embodied cognition. But I actually think the simple answer is actually we all know the answers. They are there. We're just not in the situation, and we don't have enough encouragement from each other, and we don't have ideas about how to support the things we actually know that need to be done. And so I would kind of, that would be my critique, is that it's about the body, and it's about being with one's own thoughts and allowing for transformation and for trouble to arise, and then to see solutions that, then you can decide, well, I actually do know what needs to be done. Do I have the courage to do it? How do I find the courage to do it? I would see it much more in that kind of a framework. The answer is directly, it's actually so close to us, we can't see it.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm not sure that we would all agree on how proximate the answer really is. I appreciate your optimism. I'm not so convinced. But I like where you're going.
Yeah.
Can I just interrupt 1 second, Patricia, and I'll let you in.
Mm.
I'm reminded to ask everyone to be reminded that the other session has started. The link is again in the chat. If you wish to go, please do. And we'll wrap this up entirely in about 5 minutes. Patricia, please, I'm sorry.
I just, I agree. I'm not sure we all know the answer, but I love your notion of staying in trouble. I think that's great. And in the suffering, good trouble, right? And in the suffering that, or the experience of that's embodied.
Well, my example of again, this is not a utopian kind of thinking, but I would just say one of the painful things that we will have to face is how much agency we actually have.
Yeah.
And I believe people have put themselves in situations where they have great ideas, but actually little to no agency. Mm. And that's something that, to face that is, a painful thing. And then the question is, how do you gain agency? And like I said, I've been actually, one of the things I'm able to do is to really talk with a lot of people and to be in different worlds. And it's great to be in this world right now. But what I hear is, people have tremendous ideas. They connect with each other. There are some basic strategies which really crystallize. And it's not about a complete solution. I came across the term agile programming. It's about what to do next. And once you know the first 3 or 4 steps about what to do next, you're into something. And it's about cultivating that complex kind of generative ecology of social structure and action that I think is a vision for a way forward. It goes beyond being on the street and occupying Zuccotti Park. It's what has to happen after that.
Understood. Other comments? Patricia, were you going to say something?
Oh, I like that. I like the dancer speaking.
Great. A few more minutes before we've been asked to stop. Other comments from anyone?
A quick comment to Steve. Steve, you had some very good comments in the chat, but you sent them just to me, so you might want to repost them because they're very...
I did send them on. I think I did again, so okay. I hope I did. I think I did.
Yeah. Please do, because we will save the chat.
Oh, can we get the chat?
That's a good question.
If you say...
Yes, you can get the chat.
Right, you also... In the lower right, there's a little box. At least
no, I can read the chat. I meant,
No, you can save it. If you click on that box with the 3 dots, it gives you the option of saving the chat wherever you want it saved.
Beautiful, thank you so much.
That's probably easier and faster. We'll be capturing it as well for the future stream.
Save the chat, where?
Well, this might be a nice point. My thanks to everyone. Really, really appreciate it.
Oh, wait.
Keep the ideas coming. All the best to all of you. Be safe. Bye-bye. Thanks especially to the panelists.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks so much, Paul, for setting this up.